He divorced me on a Tuesday morning, not with tears, not with guilt, but with relief. He sat across the table, suit perfectly pressed, wedding ring already missing, and said the words like they were a business decision. "I'm in love with someone else." That sentence lasted less than 5 seconds, but it erased 10 years of my life. I remember staring at the wall behind him, not his face, because if I looked at him, I might beg, and I refused to become the woman he expected me to be, broken, desperate, disposable. Her name came next, Elena, younger, beautiful, effortlessly confident in the way only a woman who has never built anything herself can be. "She understands me," he said. I almost laughed. Because I had built him, not metaphorically, literally. Every company he owned, every investment he bragged about at dinners, every financial structure that kept his empire standing. That was me, but the world never sees the architect, only the building. The divorce was fast, surgical. He had already planned it. He kept the house, the cars, the lifestyle. I kept silence. People assumed I lost. Friends stopped calling. Business partners drifted away. Even my family spoke to me carefully, like I was fragile glass. They didn't know what I was really doing, because while everyone else was mourning the marriage, I was studying the collapse. Every night I opened my laptop, not to cry, not to stalk Elena, but to review files, accounts, partnerships, holding companies hidden 3 layers deep. He never cared to understand the details. That was my thing, he used to say. That trust would destroy him. The first micro-hook came quietly. A notification from the bank, a routine alert, one account. One small anomaly, nothing dramatic. But it reminded me of something important. I still had access, not illegally, not secretly, legitimately, because he had never removed my authority. Why would he? He thought love was the only thing he was taking away. 2 weeks after the divorce, I saw the engagement photos. Elena in white, my ring, reset, redesigned, reborn on her finger. The caption read, "Forever starts now." I felt something shift inside me, not anger, not jealousy, precision. I didn't act immediately. That's where most people fail. Revenge rushed is revenge wasted. Instead, I waited. I watched him spend. Celebrate promise. I watched Elena quit her job. Watched her move into the penthouse I had financed. I watched my ex-husband grow careless. Then the wedding date was announced. 6 weeks away. That was when the real story began. The first move was invisible. A single approval delayed, a single signature withdrawn. Nothing that could be traced back to emotion, just structure. His credit card declined at a restaurant. Only one card, he laughed it off. System error, he told Elena. But that night, he called me. "Hey, quick question." I let the silence stretch long enough to make him uncomfortable. "My card didn't work earlier," he said. "You wouldn't know why, right?" I smiled. "No," I said softly. "Why would I?" That was the first crack. Not enough to destroy him, enough to wake him up. Over the next few days, the micro-hooks stacked. A supplier asked for advance payment. A loan review was postponed. An investor requested updated documentation. Elena started asking questions. He started snapping. Then he did something stupid. He showed up at my apartment, unannounced, angry, defensive, still arrogant. "What are you doing?" he demanded. I looked at him calmly. "I'm rebuilding my life," I said. "Isn't that what you wanted?" That's when fear entered his eyes. Because for the first time, he realized something terrifying. I wasn't reacting, I was executing. 3 days later, the bank froze his primary account. Not permanently, not illegally, pending verification. The wedding was 10 days away. And suddenly, nothing could move forward without money. The venue called, the caterer hesitated. The jeweler demanded full payment. Elena cried, my ex-husband threatened. And that was when I made the final call. Not to a lawyer, not to a bank, but to a man he never knew existed. The silent partner, the man who truly owned the foundation. And as I hung up the phone, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The wedding would still happen, but not the way they imagined. Power doesn't announce itself, it whispers. And once you hear it, you can never unhear it again. The morning after his primary account was frozen, my ex-husband woke up believing it was a mistake. That was the most dangerous stage, hope mixed with arrogance. He still thought the world worked in his favor. That money, like love, would always return once he demanded it loudly enough. He called his bank before breakfast. He called again before lunch. By dinner, his voice had changed. Not angry yet, not panicked. Confused, Elena noticed first. She always did. She noticed the way he stopped ordering wine without checking the price, the way he hesitated before confirming final payments, the way his smile arrived half a second too late in photos. Microhook Dafir doesn't enter through the front door. It seeps through cracks. That evening, he received an email marked Urgent Review. Nothing alarming, just a request. Updated compliance, routine verification. The kind of thing executives skim without reading. But this time he read every word, because something inside him knew. He forwarded it to his accountant. No reply. By the third day, the silence was louder than any denial. The wedding countdown continued online, 7 days to go. Elena posted rehearsals, dresses, flowers. But something had changed in the comments. People sensed instability the way animals sense storms. I watched quietly. I didn't interfere. That's another thing people misunderstand about control. It doesn't require constant action. Sometimes the most powerful move is allowing the system to collapse under its own weight. On day 4, a supplier pulled out. Just one, but that supplier was critical. The venue demanded reassurance. The caterer requested partial payment up front. The jeweler stopped responding altogether. That night, he came to my apartment again. This time he didn't knock, he pounded. When I opened the door, he didn't look like a groom. He looked like a man drowning in a room full of water he couldn't see. "What did you do?" he asked again. His voice wasn't angry now, it was scared. "I didn't do anything," I said calmly. "You divorced me, remember?" He laughed nervously. "Don't play games," he snapped. "This is about money." I tilted my head slightly. "Then why are you talking to me?" That question landed harder than any accusation. Because suddenly, he understood the truth he had spent years avoiding. I wasn't his emotional support. I was his infrastructure. He stepped closer. "You're doing this to punish me." "No," I said, "I'm doing nothing." And that was the most terrifying part. He left without another word. Microhook. That night, Elena sent me a message. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't cruel. It was desperate. "Whatever you're doing," she wrote, "please stop. This is our wedding. Our." I stared at the word longer than I expected. Then I closed the chat, because this was never about her. It was about consequences. The next morning, the bank escalated the review. Not a freeze, a pause. Subtle, legal, immaculate. His secondary account still worked. Barely, just enough to keep him calm. Just enough to keep him spending. Because a trapped animal with a little freedom will exhaust itself faster. He made a mistake that afternoon. He called the silent partner. The one man whose name never appeared on contracts. The one man he believed was a friend, Daniel. I know about the call because Daniel called me immediately after. "He's nervous," Daniel said, asking questions. "Did you answer them?" I asked. "No," Daniel replied. I asked him who told him he owned everything. That was the moment the foundation cracked. Because for the first time in his life, my ex-husband felt something unfamiliar. Displacement. By evening, he was fighting with Elena. Not loudly, quietly. The worst kind. She wanted reassurance. He wanted time. She wanted honesty. He wanted control, and control was slipping through his fingers. Microhook. That night, he did something reckless. He threatened legal action against me. That was when I knew the end was close. Because threats mean you've run out of leverage. I forwarded the message to Daniel. Then I made the call I had been saving. "Is it time?" I asked. Daniel paused. Then he said, "The wedding?" "Yes." Another pause. Then a smile I could hear through the phone. "I'll be there." The night before the wedding, everything was ready. The hall, the guests, the dress, except the money. The final payment never cleared. The venue didn't cancel. Not yet. They waited. Hope is expensive. My ex-husband didn't sleep. Neither did Elena. I slept better than I had in months. Because I knew what was coming. The wedding morning arrived bright and cruel. White flowers, soft music, smiling faces. He stood at the altar believing the worst was over. Believing that if he could just make it through today, everything would stabilize. That was his final illusion. Because as the ceremony began, the doors opened. And a man walked in who didn't belong there. Not dressed for celebration, not smiling. And my ex-husband turned pale, because he recognized him. Weddings are supposed to feel timeless. This one froze in time. The moment Daniel stepped through the doors, something invisible shifted in the room. Conversations died mid-sentence, smiles stiffened, phones lowered, even the music hesitated, as if it sensed it was about to become inappropriate. Daniel didn't rush, he never rushed. He walked down the aisle with calm, deliberate steps, his eyes fixed not on the bride in white, but on the groom whose face was draining of color with every second. Microhook, my ex-husband knew that walk. He had seen it once before, years ago, when Daniel entered a boardroom and took control without raising his voice. Back then, he had laughed it off. Today, he couldn't breathe. Elena noticed the change immediately. She leaned toward him, whispering, "Who is that?" He didn't answer. Because if he spoke, his voice would betray him. Daniel stopped 3 feet from the altar, close enough that the guests could hear every word, close enough that there was no escape. "Good afternoon," Daniel said politely. A few people chuckled, assuming this was a surprise guest, maybe a dramatic friend. Then Daniel turned slightly, addressing the room. "I apologize for interrupting a private ceremony," he continued, calm and measured. "But what's happening here involves assets, contracts, and ownership that no longer exist." Silence. Not confusion, shock, microhook. The officiant stepped back instinctively. Elena's smile faltered. My ex-husband swallowed hard. "Daniel," he said quickly, forcing a laugh, "this isn't the time." Daniel looked at him with something close to pity. "There was never going to be a convenient time," he replied. He reached into his jacket and removed a slim folder. No dramatics, no theatrics, just paper. "That wedding," Daniel said, gesturing around the room, "is being funded by money you no longer control." Murmurs rippled through the guests. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else whispered, "What does he mean?" "Microhook," Daniel continued. "The accounts paying for this venue, the catering, the jewelry, the honeymoon, and the company funding your lifestyle have been dissolved as of this morning." Elena turned sharply toward my ex-husband. "What is he talking about?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Because for the first time in his life, he had no story prepared. Daniel stepped closer. "You were the face of the operation," Daniel said evenly, "but you were never the owner." He opened the folder. Inside were documents, signatures, structures, my work. "The architect," Daniel continued, "was someone you underestimated." And then he turned, slowly, deliberately, toward me. Every head in the room followed his gaze. I stood at the back, dressed simply, unnoticed until that moment. Now every eye was on me. Microhook, Elena's face twisted in disbelief. "You," she whispered. My ex-husband stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. Daniel's voice cut through the tension. "She built everything you believed was yours," he said. "And when you removed her, the structure collapsed." The officiant cleared his throat awkwardly. "This is highly inappropriate," he said weakly. Daniel didn't even look at him. "This," Daniel replied, "is a legal clarification." He turned back to my ex-husband. "Effective immediately," Daniel said, "all shared holdings revert to original control." He handed over a single page. My ex-husband didn't take it. His hands were shaking. Elena grabbed the paper instead. She scanned it. Her breathing changed. "What does this mean?" she asked sharply. "Tell me what this means," Daniel answered for him. "It means the house you live in is no longer yours," he said. "The accounts are closed. The company is under review." "And the wedding?" He paused briefly. "Is unfunded." Elena's knees buckled. Someone rushed to support her. "Microhook," my ex-husband finally spoke. "You planned this," he said to me, voice cracking. I met his eyes. "I survived this," I replied. That sentence hit harder than any accusation. Because this wasn't revenge fueled by rage. It was recovery fueled by clarity. The guests began to leave. Quietly, no applause. No drama, just discomfort. Because nothing makes people leave faster than witnessing truth they don't want to acknowledge. The officiant gathered his things. The musicians stopped playing. The room emptied. Leaving only the wreckage, Elena stood frozen. The dress suddenly looked too heavy. Too white, too expensive. "You told me you owned everything," she whispered to my ex-husband. He didn't answer, because he didn't own even his own narrative anymore. Daniel closed the folder. "This isn't personal," he said to my ex-husband. "It's structural." Then he looked at me. "You were precise," he said. "As always." I nodded. That acknowledgement mattered more than the collapse, because someone had finally seen me. Elena turned toward me. Her eyes weren't angry. They were hollow. "You won," she said quietly. I shook my head. "No," I replied. "I ended something." She didn't understand the difference. My ex-husband finally found his voice. "Please," he said, "we can talk." I stepped closer, just close enough. "We are talking," I said. "This is just the part you never listened to." Daniel walked away. The staff began dismantling decorations. White flowers were placed into boxes. Unused, uncelebrated. The wedding was over. But the consequences were just beginning. As I turned to leave, my ex-husband spoke again. Barely audible. What happens now? I paused. Not because I owed him an answer, but because the truth was heavier than silence. Now, I said, you live with what you chose. And I walked out. The world didn't explode after the wedding. It went quiet. That's what surprised me the most. I had imagined shouting, headlines, dramatic confrontations. Instead, the silence wrapped itself around everything like fog. The kind that makes you question whether the ground beneath your feet is still solid. I walked away from the venue alone. No one followed. No one stopped me. Behind me, white flowers were being packed into boxes, untouched. Chairs scraped softly against the floor as staff dismantled a dream that had lasted less than an hour. And somewhere inside that building, a man who once believed he owned the world was discovering what it meant to lose gravity. The first microhook came that night. My phone rang. I didn't answer. It rang again, then again. I already knew who it was. I let it stop on its own, because power shifts when you stop responding. The next morning, his name was everywhere. Not in headlines, not in scandals, in whispers. Partners asking questions. Banks requesting meetings, friends suddenly unavailable. I knew the pattern well. I had designed it. But knowing something intellectually doesn't prepare you for watching it dismantle a human being you once loved. That was the part I hadn't planned for. Elena left him 3 days later. I found out not through gossip, but through a message she sent at 2:14 a.m. He lied to me, she wrote. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. Yes, I typed, then erased it. She didn't need my confirmation. She needed someone to blame, and I refused to be that person. Microhook. My ex-husband tried calling again. This time I answered. Not because I missed him. Because I wanted to hear what desperation sounded like. I don't have access to anything, he said without greeting. They won't talk to me. I know, I replied, a pause. You did this. No, I said. I stopped preventing it. That distinction broke him. Because it meant I wasn't attacking him. I was simply no longer holding him up. I need your help, he said quietly. There it was. The sentence he never thought he would say. The man who once told me I was replaceable was now asking me to save him. Microhook. I can't, I replied. Won't, he corrected bitterly. I closed my eyes. No, I said. Can't. Because if I stepped back in, I would become the woman he left again. The invisible foundation, the silent architect. And I had buried that version of myself the day he signed the divorce papers. He laughed then, a short broken sound. So this is it, he said. You're just going to watch. I already watched, I replied. For years, I hung up. That night Daniel came by. He didn't bring documents. He didn't bring updates. He brought wine. You dismantled him cleanly, he said. Most people wouldn't stop where you did. I didn't stop, I said. I finished. Daniel studied me carefully. There's a difference, he said. I didn't answer. Because the truth was harder to say out loud. Winning didn't feel the way I expected. There was no rush, no triumph, just space where rage used to live, space where love had died. And in that space, questions started forming. Who was I now that I wasn't fighting to survive? Microhook. A week later, I received an envelope. No return address. Inside was a single document. A full financial breakdown of what remained of my ex-husband's assets. Very little. At the bottom was a handwritten note from Daniel. You could finish this. No one would blame you. I stared at the paper. Finish this. I thought about the man who had looked at me across the divorce table and believed I would fade quietly into the background. I thought about Elena standing in white, convinced she had inherited a kingdom. And then I thought about myself, the woman who built everything, the woman who disappeared, the woman who survived. I folded the document and placed it back in the envelope. Not because I forgave him, but because destruction no longer interested me. Microhook. The real victory had already happened. 2 weeks later, I saw him again, by accident, a coffee shop near my office. He looked older, smaller, like a man whose reflection no longer obeyed him. He saw me too. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he nodded, not as a husband, not even as an enemy, as a man acknowledging a force he could never control. He didn't approach. That mattered, because it meant he finally understood boundaries. I walked past him without stopping. My heart didn't race, my hands didn't shake. The chapter had closed, or so I thought. That evening, Daniel called. There's something you should know, he said. My chest tightened. What? I asked. The legal fallout isn't over, he said. And there's a choice you need to make. A pause. One that could change how this story ends. I looked out the window at the city lights, at the world that had kept spinning while my life collapsed and rebuilt itself. What kind of choice? I asked. Daniel's voice lowered. The kind that decides whether this ends quietly or becomes something much bigger. Power doesn't announce itself when it arrives. It waits, it tests you, and then it asks a single question. What kind of person are you now? Daniel's words stayed with me long after the call ended. A choice, not about money, not about revenge, about legacy. The next morning, I sat alone in my office before anyone arrived. The city outside moved with the same indifference it always had. Cars. People, lives intersecting without ever touching mine. On my desk lay 2 folders. One contained everything needed to erase what remained of my ex-husband's professional existence. Legal leverage, silent clauses. Institutional pressure, a clean end. The other folder held something else, a restructuring proposal. One that would keep him afloat, barely not out of mercy. Out of control, microhook. This wasn't about saving him. It was about deciding whether my strength needed a victim to prove it existed. I thought back to the woman I used to be. The one who stayed up late fixing problems no one knew existed. The one who smiled in public and bled in private. The one who believed love meant endurance. She had survived, but she had also disappeared. I wasn't sure I wanted to bring her back. Daniel arrived mid-morning. He didn't ask questions. He simply looked at the folders. You know, he said calmly, most people don't hesitate here. I know, I replied. They confuse closure with annihilation. I met his eyes. And what do you think I'm confusing it with? Daniel paused. Evolution, he said. That word settled heavily in the room. Microhook. By noon, my ex-husband requested a meeting. Not demanded, requested. That alone told me how far he had fallen. I agreed. He arrived 10 minutes early. Another sign. He stood when I entered. Another. I won't take much of your time, he said. I didn't invite him to sit. He noticed. I'm not here to beg, he added quickly. I raised an eyebrow. Then speak carefully, I said. He exhaled. I was wrong, he said. Not I'm sorry. Not I regret it, wrong. It was the closest he could get to accountability without losing himself completely. I thought I built something, he continued. But I was just standing on it. I said nothing. Microhook. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. But I need to know if you're going to finish this. Finish this. The same words Daniel had used. Interesting how language circles back when people run out of options. I already finished, I said. He looked confused. I took back what was mine, I continued. What happens to you next isn't part of my identity anymore. That hurt him more than anger would have, because it meant he was no longer central to my story. I slid one folder across the table. This keeps you solvent, I said. Not comfortable, not powerful. Just standing, he stared at it. And the other folder? He asked quietly. I closed it. That one disappears, I said. Along with the version of me who needed it. Microhook. He swallowed. Why? He asked. I considered the question carefully. Because I don't want my strength to look like your destruction, I replied. For a moment I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Respect, not love. Not desire, respect. He stood slowly. Thank you, he said. I shook my head. This isn't kindness, I replied. It's boundaries. He nodded and left. Just like that. No drama. No apology tour. Just 2 people acknowledging an ending that had been overdue. Microhook. That evening, Elena tried to contact me. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty. Out of closure. Some conversations don't add meaning. They only reopen wounds. Weeks passed. The noise faded. The whispers stopped. My name stopped being associated with his. That was the real victory. One night, Daniel and I sat overlooking the city. You surprised everyone, he said. I surprised myself, I replied. He smiled. You didn't take the final blow. I didn't need it, I said. He nodded thoughtfully. Most people never realize that restraint is louder than revenge. I looked out at the skyline. I didn't do this to be remembered, I said. I did it to be free. Daniel raised his glass. To freedom, he said. I clinked mine against his. But even as the moment settled, a quiet realization crept in. This wasn't the end, because letting go of destruction creates space. And space demands purpose. Microhook. 2 days later, I received an invitation. A speaking engagement, private. High-level women who had lost everything because they trusted the wrong person. They wanted me to talk, not about revenge, about rebuilding. I stared at the message. And for the first time since the divorce, I smiled without effort, because the story was no longer about what was taken from me. It was about what I could give back. Still, one question lingered. If power wasn't meant to punish, what was it meant to create? Some endings don't arrive with noise, they arrive with clarity. The stage lights were warm, but not blinding. The audience wasn't massive, yet the room felt heavy with attention. Women sat in neat rows, each carrying a story that had fractured them in private. I stood at the podium, hands steady, not because I wasn't afraid, because fear no longer controlled my posture. Microhook. I wasn't destroyed by divorce, I began. I was revealed by it. The room stilled, faces lifted. Some nodded before I finished the sentence. I didn't lose everything when my marriage ended, I continued. I lost the illusion that love requires erasure. That line landed. I could feel it. I told them my story, not as a weapon but as a mirror. I spoke of invisible labor, of emotional debt, of being praised in public and diminished in private. I didn't name him. He didn't deserve that kind of immortality. I ended with a truth that had taken me years to learn. Power isn't loud, I said. It doesn't demand, it decides. The applause wasn't explosive. It was sustained, meaningful. And when it ended, something inside me finally rested. Microhook. After the event, a woman approached me. She was young, nervous. My husband left me for his assistant, she said quietly. I thought my life was over. I met her eyes. It's just unrecognizable, I replied. Her shoulders loosened. That moment mattered more than the wedding ever had. Weeks later, I ran into my ex-husband one last time, not by chance, by intention. He asked for coffee. I agreed, not for him. For closure, he looked healthier, less desperate, more human. I wanted to thank you, he said once we sat down. For what? I asked. For not finishing me, he said. I considered his words. I didn't spare you, I replied. I spared myself, he nodded. I see that now, microhook. There was no tension, no longing. Just two people acknowledging that love can exist without survival attached to it. I'm getting married again, he said hesitantly. I smiled. Congratulations, I said. And I meant it, because his future no longer threatened mine. Before we parted, he said something unexpected. You were always the strongest person in the room, he said. I just didn't know what to do with that. I stood. That was never my problem, I replied. And for the first time, I watched him walk away without feeling anything pull at my chest. Later that night, I sat alone in my apartment. No champagne, no celebration, just quiet. And in that quiet, I realized something profound. I had spent years proving my worth to people who benefited from my doubt. That chapter was closed. Microhook. Daniel called. I heard the talk went well, he said. It did, I replied. You've become something else, he said thoughtfully. So have you, I said. He laughed softly. Do you regret not taking everything? I looked out at the city. No, I said, because I took myself back. He didn't respond immediately. Then quietly, that's rare. The next morning I signed paperwork, not to destroy, to build. A foundation, one that funded women rebuilding their lives after betrayal. Legal education, not financial autonomy. Psychological recovery, not charity, infrastructure. Because I'd learned something critical. Power doesn't need to punish to be meaningful. It needs to prevent suffering from repeating. Microhook. On the first day the foundation opened, a letter arrived. No name, just a short note. You didn't just end something, you started something. I folded the paper carefully and smiled. Because the story wasn't about the man who left, or the woman who replaced me, or the wedding that collapsed. It was about what remained after everything fell apart. What remained was me, standing, whole, unapologetic, free. And if this story had a moral, it wasn't about revenge, it was about transformation. Because the most terrifying thing you can become is someone who no longer needs to be feared to be powerful.